Hi, Richard. Richard, we are now at Antalya Diplomacy Forum, and I would like to start with a question of this. Since we last made interview, Russia has invaded Ukraine even more, I would say, and we have now full-scale war. What does it mean for Armenia and for our region? How it is seen from Armenian perspective in Armenia, like different, political groups or different parts of society?
Well, I would say looking at the Russian invasion of Ukraine, in many ways, our countries in the South Caucasus face an unprecedented new reality. This new reality is much more than just Ukraine. It's a Russian assault against the sovereign choice and chosen future of the people of Ukraine. In other words, the implications from Russia's military invasion against Ukraine is a very distressing and disturbing sign for all of our countries. In the broader picture, what we see is a democratically elected legitimate government of Ukraine is under threat from an authoritarian power of Russia. Most likely, looking forward, it's not the war itself, but the aftermath that has the most significant implications for Armenia and Azerbaijan in the South Caucasus in the following way. Whatever happens in Ukraine, whether Russia wins in the end or loses, the likely coming reaction will be a resentful, ever isolated, weak Russia, which poses a more dangerous threat to the independence and sovereignty of not only our countries, but all of Russia's neighbors. We should therefore expect a Russian crackdown directed against the near abroad, Russia's natural sphere of influence based on their own perception, meaning that for Armenia, for Azerbaijan, for Georgia, we should expect increased pressure using frozen conflicts from Moldova to Georgia, as well as Nagorno-Karabakh, as leverage. And for Armenia, Russia has a pressure point. Not just the peacekeepers in Nagorno-Karabakh, but a Russian military buildup in Armenia. For Azerbaijan, we should also expect much greater Russian intolerance, for Azerbaijan playing a bigger strategic role with Turkey, with energy, and perhaps in many ways worsening the zero-sum game approach of Russia. All of which are bad for our countries. We share the same threat in the aftermath of the invasion of Ukraine.
But what is the extent of change that is happening or going to happen for, I would say, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and other neighboring countries for Russia? Are we back to Cold War? Are we experiencing creation of a new world in Russia, around Russia, that will put us at a choice, like we will have to choose between, Western world and Russian world? Like, what will it mean for our people, like for everyday life? How much is it going, to change our lives?
That's a very good question, and in fact, it raises a number of important points. First, let's look at the direct implications from Russia's unprecedented invasion of Ukraine. First, the spillover in economics from the Western-imposed sanctions, which are justified on Russia. For example, Armenians, Azerbaijanis, Tajiks, Kazakhs working in Russia, already remittances have declined in value because the ruble crashed. Second, the imposition of sanctions undoubtedly will have negative economic effects on the trade that our countries conduct and travel restrictions with the closure of not only European airspace, But sanctions on Russia's aviation sector means much less connectivity. The second point you raise is I really don't believe there's much of a choice. Russia is in a position of weakness, not strength. It's rooted in insecurity, not confidence. Russia's model is based on pressure and coercion, not seduction and attraction like the European Union. So for Armenia and Azerbaijan, in our neighborhood, there's no real choice there. No one embraces Russian values. What are Russian values? Corruption? Authoritarian governance? No one aspires to study in Russia compared to the College of Europe or Western institutions. Moreover, I think the choice is of being between a rock and a hard place, where Armenia and Azerbaijan now face a challenge to mitigate, reduce, and contain the negative cost of being either too close to Russia, in Armenia's case, or being too attractive to Russian interests, in the case of Azerbaijan. In other words, the challenge for us in our region is to weather the storm of an angry Russia, but much less a choice of submission and subordination. Rather, this is a coming period to ensure and protect sovereignty and independence of our countries. And ironically, we've reached a point where Baku and Yerevan share a challenge from Moscow that's been often dismissed or underestimated.
So Eurasian, Armenia is part of Eurasian Economic Union, and there was just a meeting where there was discussion how to minimize or mitigate this, Western sanctions. There is also attempt of Russian companies and of Russian government to, avoid or circumvent the sanctions by using some kind of, other options in Azerbaijan, in Armenia, in Georgia, in Turkey. But from Armenian point of view, how do you think that these sanctions, in what position does it put economically Armenia? I mean, how dangerous for Armenia is, in a very practical terms, to work and cooperate with Russia on many levels, economically, politically speaking, now that this can cause also punishment of entities that would not kind of accept, or so there could be sanctions against countries or entities that do not are not in line with Western sanctions. So how much is this a threat for Armenia, and what's Armenia's strategy to mitigate and minimize this?
Well, in many ways, the risk is nothing Armenia does. The risk is driven by a Russian demand to use Armenia to subvert sanctions. The good news is Armenia does have a demonstrable record of adhering to sanctions imposed against Iran. Armenia is well aware of the threat of Western sanctions affecting Armenia, and in the case of Iran, has adapted and adopted strict conformity. Second, I do think when Armenia stands up for itself with Russia, there's greater value in terms of Russia respecting strength, not weakness. For example, when Armenia refused to accept Russia's demand that we recognize the independence of Abkhazia or South Ossetia. So there is some grounds for hope. In addition, the Armenian government now is working on new incentives to attract IT sector workers from Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus coming to Armenia. We have an influx of several thousand Russian families who are opposed to the war, opposed to Putin. But the danger of a Russian backlash is growing against both our countries. Even for Azerbaijani President Aliyev, signing a declaration of cooperation with Russia just before the invasion also threatens the position of Azerbaijan. But I do think that the more direct challenge will be Russia turning against Moldova and Georgia first as aspiring reformers, democratic governments much closer with association agreements with the European Union. Armenia, Russia still takes for granted and is rather arrogant in its approach. And for many in Armenia, there is understanding of the threat from the overdependence on Russia. Russia is a different challenge for Armenia as an unpredictable so-called friend. And for Azerbaijan, it makes the relationship with Turkey that much more important. But again, in the broader perspective, the only rare positive game changer is Armenia-Turkey normalization. And this indirectly helps diplomacy between Armenia and Azerbaijan going forward. But I am worried that it's the Russian reliance on hard pressure that will perhaps destabilize the situation on the ground in and around Nagorno-Karabakh, the Lachin corridor, as a real pressure point, just as our lack of border demarcation progress, or perhaps what if Russia now turns against normalization negotiations between Armenia and Turkey. All of these, perhaps, crises are now much more likely after the unpredictable Russian invasion of Ukraine. And I do want to reiterate, it's Russia's military underperformance, its failure militarily, that demonstrates a dangerous, weakened Russia that is much angrier, more isolated and resentful. In some ways, strategically, it will drive Armenia and Azerbaijan closer together under the combined weight of dealing with Putin.
I want to ask a question more specifically, like some experts say, and you're also saying this, that, you know, Russia may, you know, how you say, infringe more on Armenian sovereignty. But we know that economically, politically, Armenia is, you know, very close to Russia and depends in many ways on Russia. I've read that some Armenian experts say that Armenia should become even closer to Russia. But my question is, how closer, like, Armenia can become, like, very practically speaking, what else is there in Armenia to give to Russia? This is one question. And then from this, as you already said, there is logically probably possibility for Armenia to use Turkey, especially Turkey, I mean Azerbaijan and Turkey, but especially Turkey, as a counterbalance to Russia's, you know, rising appetites. So what exactly, how exactly this can look like? Is it even realistic that Armenia could now, because of this new situation arising, could have a different and more proactive and open strategy towards developing relationships with Turkey and Azerbaijan?
Well, on the one hand, the first part of the question, I seriously would challenge Armenian experts or even government officials demanding closer relations with Russia. There's a real danger of Armenia becoming trapped on the wrong side of history in the wake of the invasion of Ukraine. Second, the calls for a closer integration with Russia make no sense, given the Belarus example, in terms of this would be a complete surrender of any concept of sovereignty and independence. But specifically, in what areas would Armenia become even closer to Russia? It's already a member of the Collective Security Treaty Organization, the Eurasian Economic Union. It's a host of Russian military bases well beyond the peacekeeping deployment in Nagorno-Karabakh. So there's little left to give that Russia would want. But at the same time, the real test here is counterintuitively. Russia has the opposite of Lukashenko in Armenia. they have Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan, a democratically elected, twice, legitimate leader, who's become very much a trophy for President Putin in Russia, a subordinate ally, if you will, meaning that the room to maneuver for Armenia is now much less. Hence the need for normalization with Turkey to counterbalance, but also to offset the lack of balance in our relationship, in what used to be called complementarity. But I think over the long term, we need to prepare for the day after Putin. We need to prepare for a new challenge that's looming from a weak, unpredictable Russia like we saw during the Yeltsin period. And I do think that there's no real contest or choice. No one wants to integrate with Russia. Our countries are committed to the bigger prize of dealing with the West, of looking for economic development. And I really question anyone who sees a real choice between corruption and authoritarian model of Russia versus the West or the European values and standards. But at the same time, analytically, the question at the end of the day is what Armenia does now to counter the balance. The question is it too little, too late?
Richard, thank you very much for your time, and I'm very glad to see you for the first time in person.
Thank you.